Got it.
Hi everybody, and welcome to the Marshall Monday. This week we're doing University of Southampton. As you'll see, different venue for me. I'm in my car today, not driving, definitely not driving. So I'm only going to be here for the beginning because I'm just doing an introduction. It's my nephew's birthday today, so I am going to go back to his party with just us. Anyway, thank you very much for coming. Really excited to hear from the University of Southampton today. One of my favourites, of course, like all our partners. I hope you'll enjoy learning all about it. So I'll just hand over to Zoe. Thank you very much.
Hi Mary, thank you very much for that introduction. You get back to that party. Now I'm just going to share my screen, and while I do that I'll introduce myself. I'm Zoe Carroll and I'm part of the international office here at Southampton. I do hope you can now see my screen. Perhaps Sarah can do thumbs up. Fabulous. So I'll just start the slideshow. So I support our scholarships and funding students at University of Southampton, and I'm joined by my colleague Sian Steggles, who is Regional Recruitment Manager for the Americas, and together we'll kick off this session with a quick overview of, well, more of a whistle-stop tour of the research strengths here at Southampton, and in particular some of the programmes that will be of interest to postgraduate applicants. We're also really lucky to have Jake and Amanda on the line, two of our lovely US scholars, and they will share some insights into what it's like to study here with us at Southampton. We've then allowed some time for Q&A. So we do encourage you to type any questions as they come to you into the comments or chat box. Sian will be taking a look at those and we'll answer as many of those as we can. That will take us to about the halfway point. And then we're delighted to have Dr. Devorah Baum with us. And Devorah heads up our postgraduate English programmes. She's also attached to our Parks Institute for the Study of Jewish, Non-Jewish Relations. And she's going to share some of her research interests into the role that humour can play in politics. So that's just a little overview of what we're going to be offering you in the next hour. So yeah, I do hope you enjoy, and I'm going to crack straight on. Wish you were here? Well, we certainly do. Of course, we were very much hoping to host a NAFA study tour this summer, and our campus is looking gorgeous. So where are we? Well, we're in Southampton, which is on the sunny south coast of the UK, and we're just an hour and 20-minute train ride from London. In the area, we've got the New Forest, we've got the Isle of Wight, a short ferry ride away, and we've got the Dorset coast, so lots of interest locally. And the city of Southampton itself is a port city, and the university is a campus-based university, about 20-minute bus ride from the centre of town. And as you can see there, we've got a lovely green campus, lots of open space around us, and the campus is looking beautiful. We had the sunniest May on record here in the UK. And so, yeah, we're really pleased and looking forward to reopening our campus in September, where we hope to offer a blended teaching and learning experience for our new and returning students. We had some good news last week that we've gone up to 90th in the QS World Rankings. And really this reflects the fact that we're a research intensive university, and also really focused on delivering high quality teaching experience to all our students. So we're 17th in the UK in the Complete University Guide, and there's some other rankings there for you. Of course, it's a very strange time at the moment. I mentioned we're looking forward to welcoming students back to campus in September. Like everyone in higher education sector, our academic and student communities have been scrambling to support efforts to get this virus under control. And here's just a few snapshots of the research and efforts going on around our university. Everything from developing a new drug treatment trial to diagnostic testing and a respirator, so a new personal protective equipment for staff in the hospitals. And we're also particularly proud of our third-year nursing and physiotherapy students, many of whom finished their final year early so that they could join staff at the hospitals on the front line. So the university is a broad-based university, so we do offer a very wide range of programmes, more than 300 at postgraduate level. And one of those faculties is our medicine faculty. And I've just picked out a few programmes here. We have a very successful public health programme. And last year's Fulbright Scholar studied the MSc in Global Health with us. And this is a real success story for the interdisciplinary nature of our programmes and research. It's actually hosted within our social sciences faculty and is kind of taken by a mix of clinical and non-clinical staff. We also have some specialist programmes in our medicine faculty, such as genomics and our MSc in allergy, which has been awarded a World Centre for Excellence and is one of only 2 in the world with that status. Southampton is also very well known for the STEM subject areas, and I'll just pick up a few areas from our engineering and physical sciences faculty. Southampton's often known as a hub for photonics, and it's where Sir David Payne invented fibre optic technology, which is what's enabling us to have this Zoom call right now. It's the technology that enables that fast speed internet connection. We also have the Institute for Sound and Vibration Research, and next year's Fulbrighter will be studying acoustical engineering with us. Pictured here, bottom left, you can see an anechoic chamber, which is, oh gosh, this is where my technical knowledge fails me. It's a fascinating tour you can do of the chamber, and it really reduces the vibrations to allow them to take more accurate sound readings. But you can find out for yourself. This year's actually the year of sound, and so our department has provided a tour of their facilities and some really other interesting videos, which I'll share the link to at the end. And thirdly, I just wanted to highlight our Web Science Institute, which has produced some excellent academics, including Sir Tim Berners-Lee and Dame Wendy Hall, who between them were pivotal in inventing the World Wide Web. And they offer 7 postgraduate programs, including cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. When I spoke at the NAFA conference last year, I was asked to provide a fun fact about Southampton. So continuing that theme, Southampton, home of the Spitfire. And that's been front of my mind recently because last month in the UK, we had the 75th anniversary of Victory Europe Day. So the Spitfire, that iconic World War II fighter plane, was produced here on the outskirts of Southampton during the war. And Southampton, the city, as well as us, the university, has really strong ties with the military and is leading within the UK for military education. You can see pictured here the Thunderer Air Force Squadron, and we host all 4 military education squadrons on campus, as well as some prestigious scholarships with our US counterparts, the West Point and the US Naval Academy. We have a wind tunnel facility, which is regularly used by industry, including Formula One, pictured here. And that wind tunnel is named after the Spitfire, so that's a nice little link back to our heritage. It's the R.J. Mitchell wind tunnel, and R.J. Mitchell was the engineer who designed the Spitfire. And perhaps a better known fact about Southampton as a port city is that it's home to the Queen Mary II cruise ship. At one point it was the largest cruise ship in the world. I'm not sure it retains that title, but that it regularly makes the trip between Southampton and New York, because of course Southampton is home to the National Oceanography Centre, and pictured top right left here you can see our waterfront campus. So I mentioned we have strengths across a range of disciplines, and that includes ocean and earth sciences and all kinds of marine disciplines, including ship sciences, maritime and archaeology. And these all come together under the Southampton Marine and Maritime Institute. And you'll hear from Amanda in a little while, who is currently studying our MSc in Oceanography programme. A few other highlights from across our social sciences, arts and humanities and environmental life sciences programmes. Just wanted to highlight really our Centre for Population Change, which hosts the largest group of demographers in the UK. Also, I mentioned the maritime archaeology. Our professors have been involved in some very high profile projects over the years, such as the Mary Rose, where they led a team that actually raised an Elizabethan ship from the seabed, and you can now see it in its museum in Portsmouth. Just 10 miles up the road, we have Winchester, the former capital of the UK. Winchester is also home to Winchester School of Arts, which is part of the University of Southampton. And there you can take a range of arts programmes, including textile design and fashion. And finally, I just wanted to flag from our arts and humanities programmes, we have a specialist interest programme in Jane Austen studies, where we partner with Chawton House, the birthplace of Jane Austen. I know that's a very popular programme. I think that's enough for me for now. So I'm going to hand over to our first scholar, Jake. Jake is our US Naval Academy Scholar this year, and we're really pleased that he could join us. Jake, if I just mute myself and stop sharing my screen, perhaps you could introduce yourself and share a bit about your year with us here in Southampton.
Of course, thank you for the introduction. As previously said, I am Jake Backadall. Before I attended the United States Naval Academy, Maryland, and majored in ocean engineering. Wanting kind of a more broad experience, I came over here on a scholarship and spent the last year pursuing a master's of science in energy and sustainability. Really been focusing on the sustainable design of cities, everything from looking at buildings to renewable energy technologies. So it's been very broad, and which has been probably one of my favorite aspects is how much different topics I've got to learn about and go into certain amounts of detail. My favorite part really has been the composition of my class I'm in has students ranging from Canada, Mexico, to China, to Libya, to France, to Australia. I mean, almost every country it seems like. And so it's really been really neat, been really eye-opening, and the curriculum has been hands-on. The professors have been phenomenal. So it's been really neat in that aspect, because I feel like I've certainly taken a lot of way and learned a lot about leadership, even more than I learned back in the United States at my university. So it's been a really cool experience, and I wouldn't trade it for the world, even though it's been a little bit of a different second semester, but I'm sure things are going to start to get back to normal. So I know if you end up coming to University of Southampton next year, you'll certainly have a blast like I have. So I think that's kind of it, and I'm sure we'll answer questions at the end, but now I'm going to pass it over to Amanda, who is the current Fulbright Scholar at the University of Southampton. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. As he said, my name is Amanda Ciroli. I'm originally from North Carolina in the United States, and I went to the University of North Carolina at Wilmington and pursued a bachelor's degree in physics before I came here to Southampton. Here in Southampton, as I said, I am the current Fulbright scholar and I'm studying oceanography. And echoing Jake's comments, my favorite part about this program is the interdisciplinary nature and how diverse our course mates and our professors are. They're literally world leading in their fields and all across the world. It's amazing to gather their perspectives and thoughts on the field. Being in oceanography, studying ocean sciences, I spend most of my time down at the National Oceanography Center, which is the waterfront campus, and it's actually absolutely a lovely building, and it definitely. I'm going to say it's definitely a great stress relief at times to just look out over at the harbor and enjoy the scenic views. It's definitely a view. As for Southampton, I'm really pleased with how easy it is to get around. It's such it feels like a safe city. Like I come from a small town, and the ease of walking or riding public transport or biking to any of the campuses is just amazing, and such a beautiful place. Yeah, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Zoe and Sean for questions.
Thank you so much for that, Amanda and Jake. That was really insightful to listen to. So for all of the attendees we have on the call, if you do have any questions, either based on Zoe's presentation or based on Amanda and Jake, please do feel free to put them in the chat. But in the meantime, I've got a couple of kind of questions it would be good to pick your brains on. I do apologise, there's some very noisy traffic just coming up my road. So I mean, the first question would be, and I think this kind of goes to both of you really, is did you notice any major changes in terms of academic kind of setup or culture based on your kind of degree in the US versus coming to the UK? Of course, a master's always looks a little bit different, but was there anything that stood out to you about it from an academic kind of cultural perspective? And I'll address that to Amanda first, and then I'll come to you, Jake. Well, Amanda, you're on mute. Oh, there you go.
Yes. What I noticed more was that there's a lot more independent study here. And what I mean by that is in the US, we usually have homework or assignments that we work on after every class or course that we have. But here you're presented with material and then research and resources and stuff to help yourself learn I guess, learn more about the material. So it's not more just graded assignments, it's more independent study and reading, and you get to choose what aspects you kind of want to focus on in that way. So that was the main academic difference that I found.
Okay, thank you. And Jake?
I would agree with Amanda. That's been really neat, is how it's not a lot of homework. It's more assignments, and within those assignments you would have an essay to write about, but you'd have 3 or 4 different topics, so you could easily gear it towards something that you found interesting. And also I came from a military academy, so I guess in that aspect, it's been a complete 180. You don't have to say yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. It's a lot more, I think, very kind of approachable. So it's a very encouraging environment a lot of the time. So I think that's probably just my experience. So it's kind of interesting.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we've got a few questions now coming in from our advisors. So I've got a question for you, Amanda. What are you doing for community engagement, and does that activity align with what you proposed in your Fulbright application?
Right. So back home as well, I've been heavily involved with the Rotary clubs in the community. So I've been reaching out here. There's many across the city, and the university has been trying to set up a Rotaract club, which is in its process. And then this COVID hasn't really helped us. Yeah, so I've mainly just been working with the Rotary clubs and talking with them. Other than that, I have joined a couple of societies, and some of them have some social outings too. So I have interacted with to other students and other community members as well.
That's great, thank you. And then a question for Jake, which I've just seen, and I'm just going to have to scroll up. There it is. So Jake, can you tell us a little bit about the courses you're studying within the degree and why you chose Southampton for energy and sustainability?
Of course. So the cool thing about the Southampton Energy and Sustainability program is each semester you're going to take 4 separate modules, but within them there's a couple optional modules, and that was something I didn't find in a lot of the other universities throughout throughout England. And also this was kind of, Southampton was a scholarship I was offered, so I certainly went with that. But in terms of courses, there was everything from waste management to bioenergy to sustainable design in a city. And so really every single aspect was really covered. I mean, we wrote essays about oil and the downfall of oil and why solar panels are the next big thing. Or another project that was really cool and neat that we got to do was we got to build an island where we had to come up with everything about how we would design the buildings to take into account the temperatures and the rain, the humidity, the climate. So it's really just been very neat, very wide and diverse, which I think has been amazing.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions regarding programs. So in terms of our public health programs, yes, so we have an MSc in public health, and it actually has optional pathways where you can specialize within that. So those optional pathways are nutrition, intelligence, and global health and management. And obviously all of those pathways would have a big research project culminating at the end of it. But really the good thing about these masters is they're very, very much tailored to the students' interests. So they are comprising quite heavily of optional modules. So those range on things like epidemiology, demography, health geography, and medical and health subjects. So as Zoe pointed out at the beginning, a lot of these medical programs are quite interdisciplinary in the fact that they do cross over with social sciences. And then related to that, yes, there is PhD programs within social sciences and population health. That would be what you'd be looking at if you're looking at those types of PhDs. And certainly I am cognizant of time here, but we would be very, very happy to follow up with a little bit more detail on the research opportunities within those programs in particular. So we can send around a link to a catalogue of those degrees, and you would be very welcome to explore those and come back to us if you have any questions. Let me just see if we have any that I have missed. I think that is all of them. And again, we can talk a little bit more about the research as well. We just have one more come in here. So, and these are for Amanda. Amanda, could you talk a little bit about your Fulbright application process? And then a question related to that is, did you establish an affiliation during your application? And if so, how did that relationship develop? Bit of a meaty question for you.
Yes. See if I can think back to the application.
Feels like another life now, doesn't it?
It does. Right. So for the application process, I know for us, we had to be nominated by our school. So our school had, or I guess my university there, had a Fulbright representative or delegate that helped process and I guess helped potential applicants go through the process and fill out the forms and everything like that, and tailor their application to the best that they can. I remember, so actually my school got hit by a hurricane during the middle of the process, so we got sent to Zoom as well. But through with it, the university also had a Zoom interview to nominate, or to find out more about the applicant, and to decide who to nominate to the Fulbright Commission. And then once things are submitted to the Fulbright Commission, it's kind of just the long wait game, and you wait for someone to contact you to see if you've made it to the next round. And after that, there's another, most likely internet interview, and then again, a long wait until someone gives you a decision. In terms of affiliation, I did not have an affiliation before I applied. I did a lot of research into what was required before deciding to apply. And with Southampton, and I think with England, the US-UK Fulbright program, it's not absolutely necessary to have an affiliation before you apply, but it is definitely helpful to have one. So I did not have one, but my university also has a partnership, an undergraduate partnership here. So I was in contact with someone else, but I did not put them as an affiliation on my application.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was really, really useful. So I'm going to close the Q&A then formally and kind of move into our second half of the webinar that I'm really looking forward to. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you our guest speaker today, as we kind of touched on at the beginning, Dr. Devorah Baum. Dr. Baum, as Zoe's introduced, is an associate professor with our Faculty of Arts and Humanities and also attached to the Parkes Institute for Jewish, Non-Jewish Relations. Dr. Baum is not only a kind of lecturer, but also an author and a director as well. She's published books, including Feeling Jewish, a book for just about anyone, which explores modern day anxieties through the lens of Jewish history, film and literature. I think today more than ever, as we're going through some very, very turbulent times, feels quite poignant that this is probably a real agent of change in terms of our lifetimes. And I think Devorah's lecture is probably kind of going to feel even more relevant. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Baum for her talk, Dear Jokes, Whose Side Are You On? Hopefully the screen share. Moment of truth. Suspense.
Can you, hi, can you hear me, see me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, because now I am going to go from beginning, just, okay. Oh no, already. Okay, you don't want to see him yet. So guys, this is a real honor, I think, for me to be able to talk to all of you wherever you are in your various bedrooms. And I feel I should warn you that I know nothing about oceanography or sustainability, or in fact anything really about the real world at all. I come from a humanities background, and this will be quite clear from what follows, which is a talk called Dear Jokes, Whose Side Are You On? Yours sincerely, 2020. Do you remember not that long ago when liberals like myself were still fairly confident that joking was an instrument of justice and one very much on their side? That was before the new epoch was ushered in by, well, you can take your pick of the ushers, but for me it was Milo Yiannopoulos. And you can still just about recall Milo, presumably, whose personal style may lately have been dimming, but whose style of political engagement has been anything but. For the word he proclaimed, the language of the internet is mischief, schadenfreude and trolling, triggering other people, that's what the internet is for, has since spread far and wide. And so too has his disparagement of the cozy post-war assumption that with right-wing politics, everything must be really sincere. It is not sincere. If right-wing politics no longer presents as sincere, then liberals must be in a state of crisis. It's the crisis that New Yorker TV writer Emily Nussbaum describes in her essay, How Jokes Won the Election. How do you fight an enemy who's just kidding? An essay that looks back nostalgically. Growing up a Jewish kid in the 1970s in a house full of Holocaust books, giggling at Mel Brooks's The Producers, I had the impression that jokes, like Woody Guthrie's guitar, were a machine that killed fascists. Comedy might be cruel or stupid, yet, in aggregate, it was the rebel stance. Nazis were humorless. Yep, once upon a recent time, Nazis were humorless, and those were the days. Yet even then, we knew, of course, that it isn't just Nazis whose revenge fantasies get roused if you wound their narcissisms. Nobody enjoys being laughed at very much. Since being the object of ridicule is to feel oneself on the outside, excluded from the fun-loving community of the joke, few things foment a sense of non-belonging like the feeling one isn't in on a joke and so must therefore be the butt of it. As Hannah Arendt once observed of political violence, when it comes to political satire, you can never quite predict the consequences. Thus, while certain critics did warn of the potential pitfalls of satirizing one's political opponents via such partisan programs as SNL or The Daily Show, no one could quite foresee how Obama's urbane stand-up as performed at the White House Correspondents Association dinner in 2011 would seal Trump's determination to have his revenge on the man who made the world laugh at him. Trump took the presidency, says Nussbaum, by overturning Obama's sophisticated small club act with his own stadium act, full of insults, shouting, and rallies comprised largely of rage and laughter, all in an effort to wipe off the smile off Obama's face alongside the smiles of those who laughed with him. Now, this suggestion that styles of joking can give us an insight into practices of power is a view one also finds in sacked FBI Director James Comey's recent memoir. In his experience, says Comey, Obama laughed easily and never once used humor as a put-down. Trump, meanwhile, he says, never laughs, not even once. To do so would require acknowledging the existence and successful conversational play of another person. So even though, as Nussbaum says, Trump does do jokes, which are all put-downs, his real gift is for connecting his own resentments at being laughed at with those of the nation he claims to represent, as we heard in his remarks upon pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. At what point does America get demeaned? At what point do they start laughing at us as a country? We want fair treatment for its citizens, and we want fair treatment for our taxpayers. We don't want other leaders and other countries laughing at us anymore, and they won't be. They won't be. Those with a historical frame of mind were chilled to hear such words on account of their rhetorical likeness to another leader's speech in 1942, shortly after the death camps began gassing Jews. In Germany, too, the Jews once laughed at my prophecies. I don't know whether they are still laughing or whether they've already lost the inclination to laugh, but I can assure you that everywhere they will stop laughing. Which was also the speech that disconcertingly came to mind when Nigel Farage confronted MEPs in Brussels after the EU referendum. Isn't it funny, when I came here 17 years ago and said I wanted to lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union, you all laughed at me. Well, you're not laughing now. Now, I don't want to make too much of parallels whose connecting thread for me is the strain of resentment that seems to animate certain forms of populism. For while my own political prejudices are obvious from these examples, if I looked around hard enough, I'm sure I'd find equivalent examples from opposing sources. Either way, though, this is clearly a grave sort of levity. Sorry, there's a plane going past. There haven't been many of those lately, but I'll let it go by. So it's not a grave sort of levity, and nor, as joking's own technical terminology of slapstick and punchlines attests, has having a laugh ever really been all innocent fun and games. Yet for Nussbaum, who like many Jewish journalists was tweeted images in which my face was photoshopped into a gas chamber, what makes the aggressive thrust of contemporary roistering particularly unsettling is the way in which telling a joke from a non-joke has become, she says, a distinction without a difference. So much so that Satire is Dead, presented alongside a real news story, is about as trademark to the internet age as everyone's favorite crying laughing emoji. Though if that all seems perturbingly and epocally new, a short section of Sartre's 1946 polemic, Anti-Semite and Jew, reminds us that history has repeated itself as farce before. Never believe that anti-Semites are completely unaware of the absurdity of their replies. They know that their remarks are frivolous, open to challenge, but they're amusing themselves. for it's their adversary who is obliged to use words responsibly, since he believes in words. The anti-Semites have the right to play. Only now, as we find in the neo-Nazi blog The Daily Stormer, this is a matter of formal advice. The undoctrinated should not be able to tell if we are joking or not. This is obviously a ploy, and I actually do want to gas kikes, but that's neither here nor there. Joking has always been a good cover for not joking. Invoking the right to play makes it hard to pass, for instance, remarks such as the one Boris Johnson made here when comparing Muslim women in burqas to letterboxes in a national newspaper. It was a joke that led instantly to a spike in reported abuse towards the women it targeted. Yet for all that, Johnson's unswerving jocularity has meant he's rarely had to look far for liberal defenders. Thus, when the comedian Rowan Atkinson wrote to the Times, "As a lifelong beneficiary of the freedom to make jokes about religion, I do think that Boris Johnson's joke about wearers of the burqa resembling letterboxes is a pretty good one," he was reinforcing the notion that joking has a natural affinity with liberalism, so much so that Johnson's right to play is held up as proof that he's the champion of an open, tolerant, and free society. But even then, someone still has to play the straight guy, because for such jokes to work, as Sartre says, the joker must project an adversary who is obliged to use words responsibly, since he believes in words. So what does it mean to believe in words, to believe in words? Today, we tend to think of political correctness as the most stereotypical discourse of responsible usage, and a discourse whose resident snowflakes are often said to be too precious for the playground. Not that PC culture has proven any less prone to calling upon its own army of trolls, as PR exec Justine Sacco discovered when she tweeted a joke before boarding a plane to South Africa: "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding, I'm white," only to find that over the course of the flight, she'd become an international hate figure and lost her job. Her joke about racism had gotten her branded a racist. Whether or not it was a good one, the point was that it was very clear how she was being read. Sacco's trolls were insinuating that to use words responsibly, you must act as if their meanings are fixed, literal, and singular, a view quite at odds with the jester's claim that words are too slippery to be taken seriously. And yet, despite these obvious differences, are the joker and non-joker really so different? Maybe not. Both, after all, by demonstrating that every word you say can be taken down and used against you, reveal how our words aren't always bound to our conscious intentions, even if it's just the joker for whom this sense of slipperiness inspires its own form of semantic belief. The sense that only jokes can counter jokes, for example, is what likely underpins Twitter user @Hashashin's response to Johnson's burqa joke: "Great day catching up with my bestie." Because what the joker believes is that there are always lols to be had, and for some, perhaps there are. Yet for others, it's precisely this belief that there is nothing beyond the joke, that there is, in the end, only comedy, that in itself approaches tragedy. For even if we agree with the joker that words are slippery, we can't but feel that @Hashashin shouldn't have to joke about attacks on British Muslim women. Why should the slipperiness of words compel us to consider their effects unserious? Indeed, why wouldn't the same effect compel us to suppose the opposite? That when words start appearing slippery, as they do now when Orwellian doublespeak seems to cling to pretty much everything, then what's comic and what's tragic must have become sufficiently indistinguishable as to signal a world in a state of confusion, disorder, crisis. It was, as you might know, Karl Marx who claimed that history repeats a second time as farce. He was noticing the pattern whereby those ostensibly fighting on opposing sides of a battle aren't necessarily always all that different. Focusing on a split within the French bourgeoisie, it was their manner of repeating each other's traits while assuming opposition to each other that he saw as tending towards the farcical, presumably because farce is a genre of comedy that renders people nakedly as the buffoons they really are. So when farce erupts, enough has been exposed that you just can't credit the actors or believe in their words anymore. And the collapse of meaningful differences that Marx detected in historical farce also resembles the key setup of a whole family of jokes, ones you know well, the ones where we're asked how to tell the difference between seemingly dissimilar things, only to find those things move surprisingly close to one another at the point of the punchline. In my book, The Jewish Joke, whose product placement, this is the American version of that very, very easily purchased book. I understand such jokes, in that book, I understand such jokes to extend from an anxiety about difference, or rather, an anxiety about those differences that don't appear different enough. And this, I argue, was the anxiety that would prove so fatal for Jews during the emancipation period, when their lack of obvious distinctiveness stirred up strong suspicions amongst those who still deemed them slippery. And they were deemed slippery in part because whenever, as happened increasingly, they were interrogated as to the nature of their modern identity, the newly emancipated were unable to definitively nail down the word Jew to just one clear, fixed and literal meaning upon which they all could agree. So to me, it's revealing that in struggling to make common sense of their modern situation, the switcheroo reversals of jokes and the slippery semantics of comedy afforded Jews with a language with the facility to portray themselves as they actually were or are, i.e. people racked with internal differences, as in the example of the Jew stranded alone on a desert island who builds two synagogues, the one he'll go to and the one he wouldn't be seen dead in. Yet such jokes, I want to suggest, were also a vanguard of the globalized comedy that was to come. For by depicting the crisis of the bourgeois ego ideal that their emancipation was supposed to have brought about, the modern condition that ignited so many Jewish jokes, and you'll have heard a lot of them, that was equally the crisis of the bourgeois ego more generally, the ideal of the modern individualist subject, i.e. it was a cultural manifestation of something that appeared to disrupt the narrative of history's smooth progress and the idea of manifest destiny of the self, that you can choose your own history. The hysterical onset of joking, in other words, signified a very modern state of crisis that worked at once to open up the space or potential for change and the radically new, while also motioning backwards in time to the underlying sources of present instability in the buried, forgotten, or repressed. Indeed, Marx wasn't alone in perceiving how moments of crisis can reveal history repeating itself as farce. Franz Kafka, for example, traced the farcical nature of the modern Jewish condition all the way back to Father Abraham, whose trial on Mount Moriah he compared to a schoolboy who, believing he's about to receive a prize, strides to the front of the classroom only to discover that he had made a mistake of hearing, and the whole class burst out laughing. So whereas for the Protestant philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, Abraham is this great spiritual leader, a sublime knight of faith, for Kafka, he's just a fool who slips up. While a slip sounds rather silly and insignificant, in a joke, even the tiniest slip can make a very big difference. For slipping works to collapse distances by showing how people's identities are much less fixed than may be imagined. So who we are has everything to do with who we happen to be standing next to at the time, which makes the fall guy a critical figure for comedy, because what he exposes by clumsily slipping is something not only about himself, but about the perennial partner of his double act, the ever so serious straight guy who gets drawn irresistibly into the same fine mess. Regardless then of the schadenfreude at play when a serious man, a man with a plan and a business suit, gets caught in a pratfall, the same spectacle can equally suggest evidence of the divine comedy at work. When a tile from the roof falls down and strikes him dead, says Kierkegaard, then I laugh heartily. That's Kierkegaard's idea of a really good joke. He's walking along, a tile from the roof falls down and strikes him dead, then Kierkegaard laughs heartily. What joke is that? Well, since, as we know, even God likes to laugh when you tell him your plans, I think the idea here is that maybe there isn't in the end such a big difference between a fool and a knight of faith. For if Kafka's Abraham is a laughing stock, then that needn't make him any less a figure of faith, which figure was always intended for Kierkegaard to express an absurdity inscrutable to our usual habits of logic, understanding, and self-presentation. Our most sublime calling, in fact, could even be this. This is our most sublime calling, to be a laughing stock, a state where everyone is laughing at you, not with you, at you, without your seeking recovery or retribution, which is absurd because, if we're honest, we can't easily imagine ourselves feeling that way, though it remains easy enough for us to comprehend the despot for whom being the object of ridicule arouses only our desire to wreak vengeance on the world. Wondering after Marx how two such seemingly opposed ideologies as authoritarianism and liberalism could at times appear to collapse into each other and lose all distinction, Theodor Adorno understood this political phenomenon as, in the first place, a psychological one. This is the great post-war critical works of Theodor Adorno. He was thinking of Freud's description in his essay on group psychology of the wounded narcissist's attempt at a time of crisis to substitute his own damaged ego for that of the group as embodied in the figure of an authoritarian leader, a leader who saves the wounded narcissist by being even more of a narcissist. So Freud was saying, and Adorno was quoting this, that when the individual narcissism gets wounded, he's tempted very often at that time to seek a group identification with a strongman leader who whose narcissism he can then identify with to heal himself from his own wounds. And this narcissist is clearly best exemplified in the political leader, but you can also encounter him in a different type of showman, such as a stand-up comedian. Both the authoritarian leader and the stand-up are, after all, similarly capable of thrilling audiences by performing their shtick without inhibition, as if it were possible to speak freely as a liberated subject, totally unrepressed. Indeed, it's on account of this remarkable symmetry between them that the stand-up needn't denounce the politician he curiously resembles in his own narcissistic performances, for he can choose instead to take as his subject the similarity of the political despot to his own despotic narcissism. And I'm envisaging the male comic as analogous to the despot at this point somewhat advisedly. The stand-up can thus appear before us as a sort of Marxian critic, i.e. someone who doesn't presume to stand outside history or innocent of its injustices, but whose manner of engaging with his own narcissism does allow for the possibility of keeping open a future that could lead to something other than a farcical repetition. Albeit to do so, the stand-up would have to grasp something of his own historical and material conditions, including something of his own material. And in the case of the stand-up, that's usually words. But how can you grasp words when words are freighted with latent meanings, not only when one's using them jokingly, but even when one intends them sincerely? And never more so than when it comes to the slip, that accident of speech whose seeming triviality Freud thought a disguise for getting past the censors, much as he thought speaking only in jest was another way of letting slip seemingly unspeakable things. Indeed, it's precisely the slipperiness of words that hints as to why jokes can have no reliable ideological coordinates, and so can be as easily deployed to make laughing stocks of the weak as they can to ridicule the pretensions of the powerful. But even if jokes are too slippery to become the bulwarks of an ideology, their evasion of censorship by means of such slipperiness could still teach us something about ideology. For what, in the first place, the exposure of the semantic instability in words reveals is that there's a residual weakness lurking within authoritative structures of power. And so it reveals as well that one's own positioning, political or otherwise, always stands to be surprised by the way in which history can turn on a dime to place us at the opposite end of the spectrum than the one where we may have imagined ourselves. Thus, if, as is often observed, a comic's real talent is for timing, then we can learn from comedy that time too is in hock to the slippery. Hence perhaps why the most talented comics can time to perfection not only their delivery of a joke, but their sense of when is and isn't a good time to tell one, by recognizing, for instance, how the very person whom it might be reasonable to send up one day may no longer be such fair game the next. Indeed, poorly timed jokes not only fall flat, but seem to lack what jokes should surely have, a sense of humor, which sense one might regard as the more civilizing influence of comedy. For however much a stand-up, as on my slide, resembles a despot, one could equally observe that a sense of humor resembles a sense of justice. We can sense this, for instance, in the pleasure of repartee, whose drive for equilibrium comes from the balancing and rebalancing of the scales, or in the pleasure of watching those stand-up sets where hecklers land a punch only to have their line picked up by the one on stage who knows how to swing it back in the opposite direction. The job of the heckler, as the psychoanalyst Anushka Gross has observed, is to try to puncture the comedian's narcissism, while the comedian must retaliate, punishing the heckler for his envy and re-establishing himself as the king of the room. Only one of those two jesters has a mic, of course, but even in that unequal play, the point is still nicely demonstrated that words have this funny capacity for turning their sense around to make the teller of the joke the butt of the joke. It's why no one can ever really own a joke, and why most jokes in circulation appear unauthored, as if they'd erupted autonomously out of our everyday language to reveal, not unlike the God who laughs when you tell him your plans, that even our best laid words can make slapstick out of us. One tried and tested technique for revealing this funny side of words is by repeating them in such a way as to show that repetition can make a meaningful difference, which is a gesture used by a lot of female comics looking to undermine misogynistic discourse simply by aping its lines. To take, for example, this aside from Kathy Ladman, I don't have any kids, well, at least none I know about. We see how by word for word parroting a stereotypical male comedy brag, she provides about as deft a moment of comic outwitting as you could wish for. Indeed, since every narcissist must have his echo, the fact that echoes can subvert the lines they echo has developed into something of a feminist practice. In Hannah Gadsby's groundbreaking stand-up show Nanette, for instance, we hear parroted another wisecrack from the male comedy playbook. What sort of comedian can't even make the lesbians laugh, whose punchline Gadsby then mirthlessly proffers? Every comedian ever. Yet now, as we slowly get the joke, we also get how its punchline has undergone a stunning inversion, one that allows us to perceive the powerlessness of the object of ridicule, and in this case, that's the stereotyped humorless lesbian who gets skewered by this joke because she can't respond smilingly or unsmilingly without confirming the joker's thesis about her one way or another, unless, like Gadsby, she repeats the punchline so as to turn the tables not only on the joke, but on the whole business of joking itself, i.e., look who's not laughing. Now I'm racing because I realize I'm really sorry about my timing here, which is ironic. We might note, for instance, how virally Sarah Cooper's lip-syncing videos of Donald Trump have spread during lockdown, which are comedy memes that use his exact words to hoist him by his own petard. Or for an earlier example, consider comic Michelle Wolf's version of a roasting at the 2018 White House Correspondents Association dinner, in which Wolf likewise reflects back the current presidency by repeating its soundbite bites. So when she tells a joke about grabbing him by the pussy, she adds the kicker, he said it first. So I'm going to try to run on here. So what I'm saying is that by making her repetitions a real historical intervention, I think she's trying to intervene through repetition. Woolf is showing how repetition needn't always lead to farce. It can also lead to a different type of comedy, one that leads to a difference of distinction. And that's a difference that's so palpable you can even hear it in the laughter. For to watch Woolf's monologue is to notice that the laughter she provokes in her audience is mostly of a nervous kind, as if people are becoming less sure of themselves or their own positions while listening to her, regardless of who they are or where they're sitting or with whom. So by the end of her act, nobody feels they're beyond the reach of the joke. As such, the historical moment begins to reveal itself as she speaks by drawing all of us into the same mess. So comedy is rising to the critical by exposing the real dimensions of our crisis. More recently, however, a curious comic edition has extended Marx's line on historical repetitions. The new line goes, history repeats, first as tragedy, then as farce, and finally as porn. I first encountered that in a column about Trump by the Guardian journalist Marina Hyde, and then I heard it repeated in an episode about Trump in the American legal drama The Good Fight. So did those two sources knowingly repeat each other, or did they both come up with the same take on the zeitgeist in the relatively unauthored manner of jokes? I have no idea, but whichever the case, when I first read it, I thought it was funny but tragic. But coming across it the second time, I found myself taking heart. Perhaps because in repetition, there's a sense of history blindly pushing at its own borders, as if aching for transcendence and transformation. And where there's a sense of history, as a Marxist might say, there's hope. For there's the possibility of a future that could yet learn from the past rather than endlessly repeating it. I've got a couple more pages. I don't know if I have time. Do I? It seems, do I have time for a couple?
Yeah,
okay.
Couple of minutes?
Do, yeah.
Okay. Okay, that said, the pornographic image, as the Marxists think of Frederick Jameson warns, could signal the obliteration of our sense of historical consciousness, not because we've reached a promised land and forged a happy ending, but because we've been reduced, he says, to the present tense and cannot think beyond it. And of course, now during our lockdown and its tick-tocking comedy means we've been reduced to the present tense more than ever, which is the tense where comedy abides. Stand-up is even an art form that depends on the immediacy of laughter and on its disabling the time it takes for audiences to reflect and develop critical analysis, giving the greatest wits the greatest advantage in a political landscape of 24-hour news, twittering, and real-time reaction. In discussing the parallel presentism of pornography, Jameson knows there's a risk he could sound moralizing, and he has no wish to be. For whatever your views on pornography, the problem with moralizing is that it assumes sides can be taken about something so much larger than the issues of what we believe or like or consent to. Indeed, it's the fantasy of what's achieved by side-taking that bolsters the structures and values of a system in which we're all implicated, no matter which side we've elected to take. And that's something the comedian, however amoral, gets better than most, and not just the comedian. According to Russia observer Peter Porantsev, certain state actors have cottoned on to this too. The Kremlin these days, he says, instead of claiming to be a paragon of virtue, is now the satirist, prodding what's left of the West and its many hypocrisies. The tone is set from the top. Putin's trademark trickster smirk hangs above every taunting parody of high-minded Western rhetoric. So Putin here appears like the sort of stand-up comedian whose perverse morality it is to have given up all claims to morality, all the better to expose audiences to the terrible truth that you're no better than me. Which terrible truth, I'd venture, is what has aroused the unhinged laughter echoing throughout our frightening but farcical, or frightening because farcical times. A laughter that attests above all to the hollowness of our contemporary puritanisms, whether in politics or morality. And yet, all is not lost, I want to say, for the fact that nobody's an angel when they're laughing is why the comic's talent for timing could throw us back into history in a way that that we can still, even when we're diabolically joking, can find some hope in. sorry, I'm losing I'm losing myself. To put it slightly differently, while it's the anti-Semite who, as Sartre explained, challenges us to use our words responsibly because we believe in words, but then turns the slipperiness of comic words against the presumed sincerity of our own, it's thanks to the same slipperiness of words as they function in jokes that we can also see why we do not necessarily know, nor even need to know what we believe. For though we may well believe sincerely in our own words, however fickle our words may have been towards us, if we really are sincere, then it isn't whether we mean our words, but what we can learn to do with them that matters. Thank you. I'm sorry, I left chunks out there towards the end because I was racing on, so I might not even have made much sense, even if you were following.
Thank you so much, Devorah, and I can see many participants are still with us, which is fantastic.
Well, stop share, do I?
Yeah, you could stop share now. Brilliant. I don't know whether there are, I can't see any questions in the chat line, and since we are at time, I suggest we pause it there. I did just, if I'm allowed just to have one final word, and then Sarah, I don't know whether you want to round it off at all or not. I wanted to flag that Devorah was one of many fantastic colleagues at Southampton that were wanting to share their research with this audience, and so I've put together some, hopefully you can see this, some other talks from our English faculty colleagues, particularly those who teach on the Jane Austen Studies Masters, as well as that tour that I mentioned about the Digital Sound Festival, the tour of the Anechoic Chamber from our Institute for Sound and Vibration Research, and also a series of bite-sized lectures that we've been releasing every week throughout lockdown on popular topics, and that does include one on public health, so that might be of interest to some of you. Thank you again so much, Devorah, for that fantastic talk there. It's got me thinking about, yeah, comedy is such a powerful tool, but also very complicated. Yeah,
I don't. Am I meant to answer questions, or there aren't questions? No,
I can see there's some lovely comments in the feedback box, and I'd echo those as well.
And we've got a question about Devorah's slides being available, and they will be, won't they, Sarah? I think they're going to be shared with all NAFA members.
All right, okay.
Really lovely feedback, though. Really great. Or someone would love. Someone would love your take on humour in Jane Austen. Can you read? You've probably seen that.
Okay, yeah. Well, funnily enough, I'm working on that at the moment, so there you go. I'm very interested in humour in Jane Austen, actually.
We'll have to do a follow-up talk.
Yeah, it's a very good. It's an excellent. It's like one of the best questions I've ever been asked. Is all I can say to that, but not one I'm prepared to answer right now. It's like it means too much to me.
Top secret. Maybe next time. Oh, wow. I guess that's us done.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think we can really top your talk, Devorah. It was fantastic.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm there to give a talk about the importance of timing, and then get your timing so badly wrong.
I've gone a lot more than 5 minutes over before. I think that was good.
How did I?
Let's just thank as well Sarah and Luann and Mary at NAFA who supported this talk. We're really glad so many of you were able to be here, and yeah, we're very happy to take further questions via email, and we'll make sure our email addresses are on the slide decks.
Thank you so much. I'll echo the thanks to all of you, all of the panelists on behalf of NAFA. Thank you for participating, and Dr. Baum, thank you for that fabulous talk. We'll look forward to next time on Jane Austen. So thank you all, and thanks everyone for joining. We'll be in touch with slides and contact information from the presenters today, and be on the lookout this week as well. We'll send out a registration link to next week's talk. So hope to see you then. And thank you all again so much for joining. Everybody stay well and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye.